So I have 2 points to make. One is quite sensational and controversial, potentially, and the other is hopefully a bit more sort of commonsensical. I'll start with the controversial, which is, and the opposition party's energy shadow minister has specifically noted Korea as an example. Do you think Koreans know about Future Made in Australia and the hydrogen incentive tax?
No, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, obviously, or businesses, but I think there's, not only do they have to sell it politically in Australia to voters, but they also need to sell it to big companies like POSCO. You know, there's a real opportunity here for us to shift away from coal and gas and towards new trading relationships.
So I hope the Australian government gets on like a PR.
I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will.
You know, do some advertising campaigns about how this tax incentive is now up and running.
They could be doing it as we speak. Who knows? I'm not sure.
Let's hope so.
Actually, I got to know the Future Made in Australia just a few weeks ago.
Yeah. There you go. It's working.
I mean, I did a conference presentation that the Ministry of Environment here in Korea hosted last year, and I talked about Future Made in Australia. It was yet to be passed. And the reaction I received was phenomenal, because they were like, wow, Australia is doing this. And the very premise that Australia wants to do green manufacturing, I think was a very fresh idea for Koreans, because Koreans don't associate Australia with manufacturing of any kind. So I think, you know, if this is being watched by Australian leaders, political and government leaders, I think that messaging is really critical to convince our Asian, you know, trade partners that we can make that transition happen, and Australian government is serious about that.
Well, speaking of investment, actually Korean companies are investing in Australian green projects. For example, just as you said, POSCO, they are subsidiary in Western Australia. They are working on HBI and green hydrogen projects. So I wonder, how do you view those kind of projects from Australian experts' perspective?
Well, I did a deep dive into green iron export opportunities for Australia into the Korean market last year as part of a commission report. And from what I understand and what is publicly available, that investment in Western Australia, the Port Hedland project, it's still being considered for final investment decision by POSCO. And it's a big project, and it will be in stages if it goes ahead. And in the first stage, it will run on gas Midrex technology. But if it's successful, I think it'll create one of the biggest kind of signals that there is a manufacturing, heavy industry demand appetite for renewable energy and green hydrogen within Australia. I understand there's various sort of support from Western Australian state government and federal government sort of wanting to support something like this. So for example, in January, Western Australia's Labor government did announce an allocation of 15 million Australian dollars to support POSCO's Port Hedland iron project. So again, you know, Premier Cook's office sort of described that POSCO project as aiming to decarbonize the steel manufacturing supply chain with the production of low carbon hot briquetted iron for export to the Asian market. And again, I wish the Korean audience would have more accessibility to these kind of news, because that's a great positive signal for industry decarbonization. But again, with the federal government election coming up, I think we have to wait and see if POSCO does officially decide on this investment this year.
One of the key things that the Australian Greens secured in those discussions, which I think is also really important for a Korean audience, is we stopped our export bank. It's Kexim, I think, here. Kexim, yeah. So under law now, they can't finance any coal or gas projects. And Korea and Japan's banks currently still do de-risk and make those big investments in coal and gas projects possible. And so it would be great to pay attention to say we can't keep financing these sorts of businesses because they're just driving global warming beyond levels that are safe for us to live here anymore. So I think that's another really important thing that would be awesome if the Korean investment community knew that this is also where Australia's heading. We see a heavy green industry and manufacturing industry, but there's no role for coal and gas in it.
So let me ask you a very silly question. We Koreans hate to be compared to Japan for historical reasons. So that's why
Sure.
So unlike Japan, does Korea offer unique advantages as a trade partner?
I think, so when I say similarities, the similarities are around state-led investment, state export agencies working very closely with private companies. Both countries use this same model. And in fact, the Future Made in Australia is actually copying that sort of same model that, because it's not just critical minerals and hydrogen, there might be other areas that we say there's a competitive advantage we have here to build. Could be electrolyzers or it could be fertilizer, green fertilizer. And so there's an ability to invest in certain sectors. So we're sort of copying that. So when I make the similarity, that's what it is. I think from my preliminary observations between the two countries, I think South Korea seems to be much more adaptable and willing to move both politically and policy-wise. I think Japan is very hesitant to change anything as a general rule. There's no big shifts happening. I think Korea also has some of that, but there's definitely much more willingness to be persuaded that this is a really good opportunity and it's worth changing the way we do things. Yeah.
Thank you for answering to us the question.
Well, I'd like to add that last year I also had a commissioned piece of work where I interviewed some of the Korean stakeholders in heavy industry and tested their views on industry decarbonization partnership with Australia. And what was highlighted was quite a deep set sort of idea of Australia exporting the raw materials for Korea's production. And what was surprising was how DFAT, which is the Australian Foreign Affairs and Trade Office, they're very keen for the trading partner relationship at the moment, which is, the fifth largest trading partner, for Korea to become an investment partner. And right now, Korea is Australia's 19th investment partner. So Australian side imagines a new relationship between these two countries, more on the investment, sort of moving away from the very sort of transactional, raw materials trade. However, I don't think that's quite persuading the Korean stakeholders. And I think there's, again, a bit of work to do on the Australian side to demonstrate quite specifically what is the economic advantage for South Korea to become an investor partner of Australia in industry decarbonization. And also just to understand the nuance that Korea is not Japan. And they will behave differently in the market and in forming business relationships. So it's a very exciting relationship, I think, for both countries, but there's still a lot of work to do.
So if the Liberal National Coalition becomes a ruling party, do you think these kind of conversation is still valid?
One of the things that we've done over the last 3 years on any climate piece of legislation is what we call Dutton proof. Back in a decade ago, we had the carbon price and the Conservatives destroyed that. But there were other pieces of really important architecture for decarbonisation that were in law. And they tried and they tried and they tried, but the Senate would not let them destroy these agencies. So we learnt from that. And so we've spent on a whole range of bills across electric vehicles, across renewable energy targets, across our UN climate targets, across Future Made in Australia, all these investment decisions, and in the safeguard mechanism, which involves coal and gas. But we've put it in law so that we know that even if they try and destroy it, they're going to have a very hard time because it's in law. Like, I think POSCO will make its decision whether the government changes or not because it's in law. They're going to get that financial support. So while it would be absolutely awful if they got into government for the climate, we've also done the hard yards to make sure that a lot of the really important decisions made are going to be in place no matter what they try and do.
So I have 2 points to make. One is quite sensational and controversial, potentially, and the other is hopefully a bit more sort of commonsensical. I'll start with the controversial, which is the Dutton sort of Liberal Party election platform going in to the election is to start a nuclear industry.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what is Dutton?
Dutton is the leader of the opposition.
Liberal Party.
The alternative Prime Minister.
Yeah,
yes.
so if they win, he becomes Prime Minister.
What is a Dutton is a very good question.
So Peter Dutton, the leader of the opposition at the moment, has made very public in Australia that nuclear energy industry is their agenda should they form government. And it's public knowledge in the newspaper, Australian Financial Review, Nuclear Energy Coordinating Authority, a new body in government is what they will seek to establish within sort of their first year, should they win government. And the opposition party's energy shadow minister has specifically noted Korea as an example, has done benchmarking of South Korea and KEPCO and those agencies. So I think just based on information, those scenarios are part of what's at stake in the federal election. So that this is the controversial bit, that the bilateral relationships direction could change. Now to my second and more common sense, more sound sort of approach I hope is taken by whoever forms government is to be reminded that industry decarbonisation takes a long time. And Future Made in Australia is one of Australia's quite sort of rare, it's very special for an Australian government to be this active in creating industry policy. They don't usually do it. So for Future Made in Australia to have passed House and Senate, for it to have these tax incentive and those very concrete measures now become law, that's an enormous amount of work that Australia has done. So I hope whoever comes into power and forms government, they recognize that consistent, predictable policies give confidence to the market, and it will be a better result for Australia's prosperity, for Future Made in Australia as an agenda to continue so that Korea, Japan, and the other Asian trading partners can see opportunity for investment in climate economy in Australia.
So, and Tilley, as a member of Green Party, do you have something specific in your mind to propose to Korea?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that really confuses me is this desire to use more gas and more coal. I mean, less coal, but particularly more gas, rather than switching to renewables and storage. So with renewables and storage, you have all these skills and advantages already. You can build the wind turbines, you build solar panels, one of the only places outside of China that does. You can create jobs, you can get lower prices, you create batteries, you create transmission towers, you create ships for, taking offshore wind. All these incredible opportunities, and they're not being taken. And instead, you're running into the volatility of global LNG prices, and whatever Putin does, whatever Trump does, I'm scratching my head why there's such a reluctance to just not rush into this homegrown energy that you can make.
Yeah, that's what we always talking about. The policy makers just don't listen.
I can't figure it out. I think maybe it's a hesitance that it hasn't been done, but I mean, maybe this is part of the trading relationship, is that we can show you we're running large parts of our grid. We've got 40% running of renewables already. And according to the latest Korean energy plans, you wouldn't even be that high in 2038. So we're already running at a higher level now. And our system, we haven't had any blackouts. Everything's working fine. We have a very good market structure for these things. And so maybe that should be part of the conversation too. Just to break down this sort of strange resistance to just building a lot of clean, job-rich energy locally.
I can offer a potential clue in this mystery, which is about the cost of the transition. And we're not talking hundreds of thousands, we're talking billions of dollars. And I would also like to see accelerated transition away from coal gas and more into wind turbines and, hydrogen and EVs and so forth. But in my line of work of consulting, what I am constantly faced with is the question of who pays? Who pays for this transition?
Well, you're paying for it anyway by building new LNG terminals or gas turbines. So someone's paying for something that's...
They are, but under the low carbon as a factor in these projects, who pays for what is currently more expensive in terms of getting something produced and exporting? And
well, the Australian government will pay. The future made in Australia.
Can we use your quote here as a guarantee?
Well, I mean, it's in law, yeah. The Australian government will pay for production,
So I think that question is top of mind for business and Asian governments to try and maintain, not only maintain, but further the prosperity of Asian economies while transitioning towards decarbonization. And the big question then is, who will pay? Who will prosper? So I think this is the decade to flesh that out and to find some answers.
Okay, thank you for sharing your insights. And lastly, is there anything you want to say to our Korean viewers? No?
No, thanks. It's been great. It's been great being here. I love it. I'm going to go eat some tasty...
And you have to subscribe to our channel.
Subscribe to the channel.
Well, I like to say my message in Korean because this is going to the Korean audience. But 제가 이제 한국 구독자분들께 드리고 싶은 메시지는 호주가 물론 코알라도 있고 캥거루도 있고 여행도 많이 가시고 유학도 많이 가시고 그러는데 거기에서 이제 경제적인 호주와 한국의 이 관계가 얼마나 중요한지 다음에 호주에 방문을 하시면 호주의 에너지에 대해서, 호주 재생 에너지 시장에 대해서, 그리고 또 호주 경제나 정치에 대해서 조금만 더 관심을 가져주시면 한국에 돌아오셔서 양 나라의 관계에서 이 지구를 위하고 저탄소 경제를 위한 일도 가능하겠구나, 그런 인식이 조금만 더 높아졌으면 좋겠다는 바람이 있습니다.
See, she speaks really gently. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.